Welcome to Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape podcast, hosted by Dr. Erin Phillips, Director of Cross-Cutting Programs and Acting Senior Director of Research at the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources. The show highlights SER's role in supporting our mission to promote energy-driven economic development in the state of Wyoming.
Greetings, listeners, and welcome back to Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape. Today, we're diving into the complex world of land restoration and invasive species management, a field where biology, policy, and the energy industry collide. Our guest is Dr. Brian Mealor, the Interim Director of the Wyoming Agricultural Experiment Station, Director of the Sheridan Research and Extension Center, and a Professor of Plant Sciences at the University of Wyoming. Dr. Mealor is at the forefront of the Imagine Institute, leading the charge against the invasive grasses threatening our western rangelands. Today we're talking about the importance of reclamation in the energy sector, how the University of Wyoming is serving our rural communities, and how students can turn a passion for the outdoors into a high-impact career. Brian, thanks for joining us.
Sure, my pleasure.
Well, Brian, you definitely wear a lot of hats and juggle a lot of important roles. To start, will you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you ended up in your current positions?
You know, in your intro, you talked about students with a passion for the outdoors turning that into a career. And I think that's probably the impetus for how I ended up where I am today in many ways. So I actually grew up in the northern part of Georgia, spent a lot of time outdoors, hunting, fishing, recreating, involved kind of peripherally in some agricultural topics, and was fortunate enough to be able to pursue my education in fields such as biology, rangeland ecology, watershed management, weed science, all things that tied to that interest in habitat and agricultural productivity and in things that we appreciate in the outdoors here in Wyoming. And so left Georgia, came to Wyoming, did a master's and PhD both here. Spent some time as director of stewardship and on the science team with the Nature Conservancy at the state office in Lander. And then came back to UW in a faculty role in 2009 as extension weed specialist for range and natural areas in the state of Wyoming. And then all these other things kind of progressed from there. So strong commitment to applied research that helped land managers do better with managing their rangeland vegetation that had been impacted by non-native invasive weeds, and through an extension standpoint that informed applied research, basically trying to answer questions to help people do better with managing rangelands, which ties very closely to the mission of the Wyoming Agricultural Experiment Station, do relevant research that helps our agricultural producers and natural resource managers do better. And so we shifted into more of an administrative and support role, still doing research, still doing outreach and education, but moved from Laramie to Sheridan and have been primarily located in Sheridan for almost 12 years now. And a lot of neat applied stuff there, a lot of facilities that support applied research from sort of a conventional agricultural perspective, but also working in an area that's been tremendously impacted by surface disturbance associated with energy development for decades. And then that just continued to grow, and we had a large landowner partnership summit in 2018, something like that, for the university. And one of the themes that came out that seemed common across many of the landowners was, hey, what are we going to do about cheatgrass? It's really having an impact in the state. And so we spent a good deal of time with internal and external partners, industry, NGO, agency folks, kind of trying to see what UW could do to address this issue of invasive grasses. And Imagine, which is the Institute for Managing Annual Grasses Invading Natural Ecosystems, is what came out of that. And so kind of a circuitous route to get to where I am now, but the thread is very much applied management-driven research related to natural resources to help people do better.
Okay. Very important for the state of Wyoming. So yeah, let's talk about reclamation a little bit more. It's such an important part of the energy mix. And let's talk about some of the specifics of your work. As our listeners well know, Wyoming is a top energy producer, and it's quite dry here. That semi-arid climate can make reclamation pretty difficult. What are the biggest biological hurdles to successfully restoring a drill pad or a mine site to its original native state?
Yeah, Wyoming's a tough place to be a plant, as you probably know very well, and many of our native desirable plants are adapted to low resource availability, harsh conditions. But an interesting thing is that many perennial native species in semi-arid rangelands undergo what we would call episodic recruitment. So we don't see recruitment from seed, new populations from seed for many of our perennial plants on a regular basis. Conditions might be right for, let's say, new sagebrush establishment once every 15 to 20 years. And so you look at the demography in some of these populations, and there's very sporadic sort of evidence of new populations, new cohorts into the population, and then older cohorts later on. And so when we're trying to intentionally seed desirable native species like we would be using in reclamation settings, we're kind of asking those plants to establish on command. And there's been tremendous amount of work in plant improvement through the years, both from academic institutions, from private industry, from federal agencies. And so we've got some native plant materials that are better at doing that than if we just go do wildland collections in some situations. So overcoming this challenge of just precipitation, timing, temperature at the same time is a big hurdle. And using high quality seed and using seed that we know is going to be able to have a higher likelihood of establishment in any given year is one of the ways that I think that many folks try to improve their reclamation. The other challenge, and I like the way the question is worded, restoring something back to its original native state. The soil issue is very challenging. And so if you think about, and I know there's a lot of variation in disturbance types, but if a native pre-disturbance plant community was adapted to a site, that includes the soil and the soil profile and the soil biota that were present on that site prior to disturbance. We remove the vegetation. Sometimes we invert horizons. We stir that soil up. I think the University of Wyoming's had a long history of a number of good researchers that focus on soil impacts of disturbance and how do we improve those characteristics when we're trying to do reclamation. But we have to accept the fact that we're trying to establish back to a reference type community onto soils that are inherently different. And so it's challenging. I think you think back historically, and it was folks just trying to take farming practices and move them into these rangeland settings. And people have done a lot of good things, and I think we continue to do better. And there's some great restoration practitioners in the state and around the West that do well, but it's not a consistent push button thing. And I didn't even get into my favorite topic of weed competition for resources on those sites. Weeds do well with disturbance, so it's challenging. Yeah. And as you know, University of Wyoming's a leader in reclamation and restoration in the nation, and in fact internationally in some ways. And we're still learning. It's not like we've got it figured out.
Yeah, it sounds like a complex problem with lots of disciplines involved, and including soil science and
absolutely.
Yep. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more about how you've worked with the School of Energy Resources. Working with SER in 2024, the Extension Center received a significant gift from EOG Resources to advance reclamation research. How does this type of private sector funding change the scope or the speed of the research that you conduct?
Yeah, it's absolutely critical from a number of different ways. You can be a little more nimble with private sector funding. having just gone through a significant push of some federal grant applications here in the last few weeks. We spent a lot of time writing some of these large grant applications, and there's a low likelihood of success. And that's something that we all face as academics and researchers. And having the support from partners like EOG and then a very generous match from School of Energy Resources allows us to focus on some of these very applied, specific questions that, to be honest, don't always rise to the level that they're going to succeed in some of those highly competitive grant proposals. And that's not saying that it's a lesser quality of science, but the tendency for many of the organizations that would fund, the agencies that would provide grant funding, it's not just, hey, we want to fund things that's going to answer an immediate question and be applicable in this situation. And so it allows us to target very relevant questions like how can we do better with reestablishing sagebrush on sites that have been disturbed? Or we've got some sites in the Powder River Basin that we've been working with partners with the BLM, and EOG's been in a lot of those discussions that just seem to not reclaim very well. And so trying to see if there are some of these soil microbiota issues, some soil chemical issues, to figure out why those sites are hard to reclaim. And then also providing things like student support to be able to have folks out on the ground collecting native seeds to evaluate to see if they're going to do better in some of these situations. It's a great opportunity and really a great resource that I think sometimes as new faculty members, we don't really know about those opportunities, and sometimes it's based on relationships and proven track records of being able to do things and just being in the right place at the right time. So it's tremendous. It allows us to focus on things that I think make an immediate difference, not just for the people that provide the funding, but for the broader community that can learn from those projects.
Mm-hmm. So really important in that applied research space.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yep. Well, you talked a little bit about working with energy companies. Do you have any additional thoughts on how energy companies can best conduct reclamation to support native species?
Some of this creative siting thing that like intentional, where we're going to place disturbance sites, the directional drilling to maybe be able to disturb a site that either has higher likelihood of being reclaimed in the long run or avoiding plant communities that are going to be really difficult to reclaim. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's sort of avoiding the need for challenging reclamation, being strategic up front. I always have sort of made the statement that the best way to do good restoration is to not disturb places that are hard to restore in the first place. I know that's not always the case, but many of our industry partners have been willing to, they're willing to innovate. They're willing to try different things and be early adopters of new information as it comes online. And in some ways, we as researchers take some of their really interesting, innovative ideas and then put them in a more formal scientific framework to try to attach some confidence and more sort of credence around some of their observations. Okay. It's a partnership, as you guys in this college know probably better than anybody. It's a two-way dialogue. It's not just hey, we want to do this stuff. Can you give us some support? It always works better whether it's with energy industry, agricultural producers, federal agency, land management groups, if it's truly engaged research and we kind of walk through it together. Mm-hmm. But we got some great folks in the state that are committed to it.
Definitely. And it sounds like planning ahead is also key.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to talk a little bit more about the IMAGINE program, which you mentioned earlier, which stands for Institute for Managing Annual Grasses Invading Natural Ecosystems, which is a great acronym. This is a statewide collaboration targeting some of the West's most aggressive weeds. Will you tell us a little bit more about that program and what it aims to accomplish?
Sure. I talked a little bit about sort of the functional background and the structure of IMAGINE. really, if I try to summarize what we do, the focused on invasive annual grasses primarily, which it seems like a narrow focus. But if we look at impacts to the sagebrush grassland ecosystem across the western United States, the number one driver of degradation of plant communities and wildlife habitat, agricultural productivity associated with them, by far, is invasive annual grasses and their associated impacts. Habitat fragmentation, surface disturbance, human modification, none of those even come close to the impacts of invasive annual grasses. So some estimates would say we're losing over 1 million acres of high-quality sagebrush grassland habitat per year, and roughly 70% of that is attributed directly to things like cheatgrass and ventonata and medusa head. For a number of different ways, they have routinely been shown to reduce species diversity, reduce forage quality and quantity for wildlife and livestock, but really the ultimate negative impact that they have is when they reach a certain level, they change the way that fire cycles in those systems. And species like big sagebrush do not do well with frequent fires. They don't compete well with dense stand of invasive annual grasses that preemptively use moisture early in the year. And so really you can shift. There's a number of places in like the Snake River Plain of Idaho, northern Nevada, parts of Oregon, parts of the Bighorn Basin in Wyoming that have really shifted from a sagebrush perennial grass system to an annual grass dominated system. So it's almost a different ecosystem. Plant community is different. And so imagine what we try to do is work hand in glove with land managers and learn more about those impacts, devise and implement strategies, not just tools and tactics, but landscape scale strategies to proactively reduce that continued spread and impact, and then also work to improve those areas that have been impacted. And I like to say we kind of started out just a modest little, we're going to think inside the box and work in Wyoming and work with the great partners that we have in Wyoming. And we quickly were asked to serve a little bit larger role working with federal agency partners throughout the West. And so we do some really fun things with folks. We've worked with collaborative working groups that are managing rangelands on a cumulative total of greater than 10 million acres and help them devise strategies for how they're going to reduce the impacts of invasive annual grasses. And then we provide them with scientific support, especially in the state of Wyoming. I hire a bunch of kids every year to go hike around and collect vegetation data that both helps them plan for treatments, develop strategies where they're going to implement either change grazing practices or herbicide treatments. And then we go back and we track the impacts of those treatments after they are done. There are many days where I wish I could just be one of those interns hiking around, looking at plants again. Yeah. I mean, that's the way it was a long time ago. But so really providing that kind of scientific support for our land management partners. And again, I'm going to sound like a homer here, but Wyoming leads the way in invasive annual grass management in many situations. I mean, Governor Gordon and the state legislature in the past 2 years have approved close to $90 million specifically for post-fire vegetation recovery with a focus on invasive annual grass management because they realize that there is the potential for Wyoming rangelands to go the way of Snake River Plain of Idaho, and that we have an opportunity to be proactive and prevent it potentially from going that direction and conserving the ecosystem goods and services that we have in the state in a very intentional way. And that in conjunction, the funding in conjunction with folks like our weed and pest councils in every county, game and fish partners, our federal partners, NRCS, it's great. If you do rangeland weed work in the western U.S., Wyoming is a great place to do it.
Excellent. All right, so I want to talk about herbicide and Dazaflam. How is this tool changing the landscape of invasive grass management, and what are its limitations?
Relatively new tool. I should start by saying there is no silver bullet for an issue that is complex as this. But Indaziflam has, we've been doing research in Wyoming, our team specifically since about 2015 on this herbicide. It became broadly available for range and pasture use in 2022, I think. And we've had a number of different tools that we could use for annual grass management through the years. Consistency was an issue. Non-target damage was an issue. So when we think about the use of chemical control for weeds, we want to basically kill the bad guys and keep the good guys safe, right? And the interesting thing about Indaziflam is that the way that it works allows us to realize pretty low non-target impacts for many of our species. It inhibits the growth of roots on plants. And so when we think about the fact that we're dealing with annual grasses, it means they have to establish from seed every year. And Indaziflam binds tightly to the upper portion of the soil surface where there's new seeds will be germinating. And as they germinate, they're not able to maintain a viable root, and so they can't survive. Whereas established perennials that we like to have around that are relatively stable, provide a bunch of good things, their roots are actually already below that Indaziflam layer. And so it's not what we would consider to be chemically selective. So some herbicides that have been around for a long time will only kill broadleaf plants and not harm grasses. We would call that chemical selectivity. But the pattern of movement into the soil is what allows us to use Indaziflam in a selective way. So it's a great tool on sites where we have what I would say good recovery potential. We got some bad guys, but we still have some good guys. And in many cases where we've done that, where we've effectively used Indaziflam on those sites, we see a great response from our established perennial plants that we want to have on site, primarily natives. We're talking a lot about reclamation sites where we're trying to reestablish good guys from seed. And so Indaziflam is probably not the immediate tool that we're going to go with on those sites because it's pretty much going to negatively affect any plants that are trying to establish from seeds in that shallow part of the soil.
Okay.
So if we can get some good guys established and get some roots down and then come back and use a long residual herbicide such as Indaziflam, we're doing some research in that area to see if we can kind of do a setup first, get the good guys going, and then protect them from annual grass invasion over the long term, showing some promise. But I want to put that caution out because a lot of people get really excited about a tool that's good. And like any other tool, it's got its specific places that it works very well and other places where it doesn't. And some of our research and from research from other teams suggests that you might be 3 or 4 years after a single Indaziflam application before you can successfully seed into those sites and get establishment.
Okay.
So use it with caution.
Yep. Just one of the tools in the toolbox.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Well, I find this really interesting. You recently co-authored a report estimating that unchecked invasive weeds could cost Wyoming agriculture over $110 million annually. How do you use these numbers to convince policymakers to invest in preventative land management?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not particularly politically astute when it comes to such things, but I think the numbers sort of speak for themselves.
Yeah.
And so that was a cooperative project with some of our team in our Ag and Applied Economics department and really with our county weed and pest districts. And so we took current estimates of impacted acres from a number of different weed species and then based our impact estimates on loss of forage that was documented with those weed species in the literature. So, for instance, moderately dense stand of ventinata may reduce forage availability by greater than 75%. So then we took those estimates of acreage, mapped out lost forage production, and then our economists did their thing and estimated that current annual losses to just one species of cheatgrass, and only from a grazing loss, is around $33 million a year, just from grazing, not including all those other things that it does. And then we looked at some habitat suitability models, like if we did not do anything to maintain where those species are and allowed them to spread unchecked into all suitable habitat, we projected those same loss numbers onto those areas. And that's how we came up with that $110 million annually. And so, I mean, within the context of sort of the economy of the state of Wyoming, it's not a giant number, but it's also not a small number either. Yeah. And so if we look at the opportunities to act now and prevent further invasion, I think I already mentioned the significant investment that the state is making. And I think people understood this already, both intuitively and just from their observations and experience. But this allowed us to wrap some hard numbers around it.
Yep, it's always good to have some data to back things up.
It is.
All right, well, let's switch gears here a little bit and talk about Wyoming communities. So similar to SER's mission, you're very focused on serving Wyoming communities. And of course, the University of Wyoming is a land-grant institution, and the work that you're doing really epitomizes that mission of combining teaching, research, and cooperative extension to address community needs. Will you talk a little bit about how your team embraces all of these roles to educate students and to work with communities and to conduct research and service to the state?
Yeah, you talked about College of Ag and Life Sciences and Natural Resources and then SER. I think that's just two examples of the culture of the University of Wyoming embracing our land-grant mission. Mm-hmm. Relatively small state population-wise. We are the university for the state, and I think many of our faculty colleagues across campus embrace that. We're here to serve the state, and we are intentionally set up since 1891, honestly, in our college specifically to be embedded in every community of the state. So if we think about UW Extension, we've got offices and faculty and staff in every county. And they are not only there to provide programming to help folks make management decisions, they're also there to serve as a conduit back to campus and from campus to those communities. And so they help identify needs for those folks, for those communities, for the across a range of topics, not just agriculture, community vitality and health, a number of different things, nutrition. And then they can tap into the resources of campus and other institutions and bring that expertise to help those communities be more vibrant and succeed. And I really am, with the hat that I wear currently with the Wyoming Ag Experiment Station, that's the heart and soul of that institution as well. And we've got farms in 4 different locations around the state where we actively do research and use those as platforms to branch out, not just on the footprint of the farms, but to provide research-based information for our communities, for our partners. And then really that bleeds over. I mean, I think that leads to opportunities to do that kind of engaged research that if we weren't engaged with those communities, we might run the risk of not doing the research that benefits the state. Mm-hmm. We have to have a balance. Like, I'm not just saying that we only do applied, immediately applicable research, because we need basic discovery type research to allow us to answer some of those questions. And so I think that's what I love about UW. I think that's what I love about land grant institutions in general. And I really love it about our college is it's every day. It's not just something we talk about. And then honestly, from a student standpoint, we talked a little bit about our internship programs with students getting to come out and learn how to do research and learn about plant communities in the state. That's kind of how I started with some of these things too. And it's a great experiential learning opportunity for those students to get out and not just measure plants and count things and, walk around and see beautiful country, but to interact with potential future employers. Mm-hmm. And just kind of see if they like it, see if that's something they want to do and explore potential career options that honestly that we need. We need people who are willing to get out there and get their hands dirty, but who also understand it from a scientific standpoint.
Right, right. Well, I think that's a great segue into talking a little bit more about leadership, mentorship, and the future. So you were the new interim director of the Wyoming Agricultural Experiment Station. What's your primary vision for the University of Wyoming's research in this area in 2026 and beyond?
Yeah, I think I touched on it a little bit. Our dean, Kelly Crane, likes to talk about relevant, responsive, and accountable programs. And I think that's our history. The Wyoming Ag Experiment Station is really kind of grounded in those areas. And we recently, our college recently grew several years ago. We had a reorganization on campus, as you know. And we were able to bring in some other departments that were historically in the Arts and Sciences College, botany, zoology, and physiology. And I think what that has done, and it's not that we didn't coordinate with one another and cooperate on projects prior to the reorganization, but I think what it's done is it's given us a tremendous opportunity to work more closely together on some of these issues that cut across so many different aspects of Wyoming's economy and ecology. And I think we're still trying to figure out how to, I don't think we've realized our potential of how to merge those different disciplines together under our new structure. And the Wyoming Ag Experiment Station supports that in a number of different ways as the research arm of the College of Ag, Life Sciences, and Natural Resources. So I think we can diversify the type of work that we do for the citizens of Wyoming and for the region. And I also say that I think a lot about Wyoming, but we've got people that have research programs with global reach, just like you guys do. I mean, there's things that they're working in Wyoming or they're working in other places, but the impacts are definitely far beyond Laramie, far beyond the boundaries of the state. And I think really my vision as the director of the experiment station is to continue to help people do that good work and to help them be successful and get the resources and the facilities that they need to do that without losing sight of the relevance for our people.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I really appreciate all the work you're doing across the entire state of Wyoming and in the region. So a practical question, if a Wyoming producer or a student has a specific land management problem, like a new weed or a soil health issue, what is the best way for them to access Wyoming Agricultural Experiment Station resources?
I would think, depending on where they are, so if it's a student on campus, I would say stop in, visit with faculty that you know work specifically on the area that you're interested in. No different than your teams here. I mean, everybody's so willing to talk to students that are interested in their subject. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a good way to start. If they're out in the state, I would say stop in at the local extension office and initiate that conversation there. We've got great people in those offices that are typically trained a little bit more thoroughly in a specific discipline, but the network of educators covers kind of all the things related to agriculture, natural resources, and other things. And so I would say those are kind of some of the frontline ways that I would go about it. I would also say, this is not a shameless plug, but maybe it is, if students are really interested in the invasive grasses and restoration side, check out invasivegrasses.com. We advertise our internship opportunities and employment and things there. And I think this summer we've got students from California, Texas, Alabama, Georgia, Sheridan College, University of Wyoming. I mean, it's a neat group and a neat opportunity to just get to come work with and learn about these things. So I think that's probably the way to get plugged in and learn more about opportunities there. And there's other units on campus that do similar things. I would just encourage, especially students, encourage them to not be hesitant to ask those questions and get in touch with people. Mm-hmm. Such an exciting time figuring out what they want to do And I think everybody on campus is supportive of that.
Yeah, definitely. Lots of great opportunities for students. And you do have some graduate students based at the Sheridan Research and Extension Center, is that correct?
We do.
Okay.
So we have been able to, so many of them are in the Department of Plant Sciences, focusing on plant sciences, either masters or PhDs. That department has intentionally, over the years, increased our course offerings that are available at a distance or in kind of a hybrid format. Part of that is because we've got faculty in Lingle, in Sheridan, and in Powell at our outlying research and extension centers. And so capitalizing on the expertise in those different areas and providing coursework that can be taken at a distance. I think we've got like 10 or 12 graduate students full-time in Sheridan right now. Many of those are working with Dr. Donna Harris, who's our plant breeding faculty, on a whole slew of different interesting questions related to improving plant materials, and both from an agronomic and a natural plant community perspective. So that it kind of changed COVID changed the game a little bit for us that are not in Laramie, in that we were forced to realize that we can offer courses in a way that is engaging and still practical and not have to be sitting in the same room all the time. We do some lab sections in Sheridan for courses that are on campus so they can get the hands-on element of those. But I think in many ways our ability to support graduate students off main campus honestly was probably enhanced by our stressful situation that came out of COVID.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask one more question about, thoughts you have on advice for students. With the rapid pace that technology is evolving, what are the important skills that you recommend students have? GIS, remote sensing, data modeling, and also traditional kind of boots on the ground work.
Yeah, there's all this discussion about artificial intelligence and what careers are going to go away. And it's all speculation, right? There's such a buzz around that right now. I think what I would and I do encourage students to think about is maintaining a mix of both. These higher tech skills, if you want to think about that, and being able to understand complex interactions, handle large quantities of data, and understand how to analyze and interpret and I will say filter information. Right? Because anybody can put anything in a public space now, and we've got to be able to have some gauge of what is credible and what is not credible. And then I think, at least in the disciplines that I work in, you still have to know what plants you're looking at. You need to be able to go out and understand how management recommendations not only may affect the plant communities and the soils and the wildlife, but also the people that work on those landscapes. And I know that we're in a great technological revolution, but we're still going to need people that can go out and monitor things, evaluate things, make decisions. I just think you can become too far removed when we're working in natural systems that your grounding is gone. And so I think that some of the best professionals that I get to interact with have a mix of both. They've got great technical skills. They've got some kind of practical, on-the-ground background and experience. And then honestly, many of us do not get into agriculture and natural resources fields because we like to interface with a lot of people. But the longer I'm in the positions I've been in, the more I think we realize that it's really you gotta be able to communicate. You have to be able to understand people, and those are the skills that I think allow us to really work together on these complex issues and find opportunity to have win-win situations. Whereas if we just think we're going to focus on animals and plants and soils and energy, we might be sorely disappointed in our careers.
Yep, those communication skills are so important. And just like in geology, you still need to be able to go out and identify a rock in the field.
Exactly.
All right. Well, Brian, you're clearly incredibly rooted in the Wyoming community and landscape. And we always like to end by asking about your personal favorites around the state. What is your favorite place in Wyoming or your favorite thing to do?
Oh, there's so many. My sons would tell me that I'm not allowed to say where we like to fish. Hush Creek. We like to talk about Hush Creek. You know what? If I were going to make a pitch for places in Wyoming that I think maybe are underappreciated, I would say it's our eastern grasslands. I mean, so many people, we think, especially tourists, visitors, they think about the Tetons. They think about our beautiful mountain peaks, which I love the mountains. Those are all beautiful places. But I think it's probably a misquote. I think it was Aldo Leopold that said it takes a refined sense of country to appreciate grasslands. And I think it's pretty amazing being in some of those wide open areas early in the morning and just experiencing what things may have looked like 100 years ago. And so I think, maybe go out east and visit some of those places that people typically avoid a little bit. That's the real Wyoming in a lot of ways.
All right. Well, I like that choice. Well, Brian, thanks so much for being with us today.
Sure.
It's been a pleasure. And thanks to our listeners, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape, the podcast that highlights the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. You can expect a new episode of Energy Frontier every other Wednesday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. See you next time.